Hello and welcome to another week, another myNewsWrap episode about news from the SAP and Microsoft ecosystem and the world in between. So let's get started. What happened in the last week? What news crossed my path? So first of all, some generic news from the, let's say, SAP ecosystem, kind of. Salesforce acquired Slack. Now, you might say this has absolutely nothing to do with SAP. Then basically that's true because it's about Salesforce and Slack. But Salesforce, as you or as we all know, is one of the biggest competitors of SAP in the area of CRM. And they indeed had some gaps with respect to integration of collaborative software, like Slack is offering. Slack is, I think, quite beloved by a lot of people. So this is now really an interesting acquisition of Salesforce, because now they are closing the gap with a very well established software. And it's a quite important gap, especially if you think about current times of COVID-19, of interacting with other people through messengers, through chat, through, Slack also offers video calls and something like that. So this is really something that kind of completes the portfolio from a CRM perspective. And I'm quite interesting how SAP will react from two perspectives. First of all, the obvious one, because SAP wants to get a bigger footprint in the, how they call it, custom experience area. And I am not aware that there is some deep integration with other tools. I don't think that they will acquire one, but I'm quite interested how these things will play out with respect to integrating Slack into SAP offerings. That's one point. And the second point is I'm aware that SAP is quite heavily using Slack internally. So this will be interesting to see how that will turn out. If, there will be some offboarding of SAP from Slack. So let's see what will come. Perhaps even something at TechEd might be said on that topic, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. So then we have one news from the SAP Cloud Platform area. I mean, as I said in the last weeks, SAP is kind of keeping the gates closed with respect to upcoming TechEd next week. So there are not too many news in that area. But there is one thing that is a kind of a technical detail when you're building multi-tenant apps on SAP Cloud Platform, because the tenant identifier changed. So you have a new model. You get a zone ID in contrast to the sub-account ID. And this is, for me, kind of a first step how SAP will, I think, reshape SAP Cloud Platform with respect to some points that have up to now not been really, I wouldn't say cloud native, but are kind of not the same as other cloud vendors offer it. So I think this is kind of a first announcement, and I'm waiting to see quite a lot more after TechEd, because there is some reshaping going on, especially also with respect to services that can be consumed from all the different runtimes, because currently there is kind of a problem when you, for example, want to consume a HANA database from Kyma, and this will change, I'm quite sure. And I see this as kind of a first starting point where SAP is now getting more serious on SAP Cloud Platform and getting more cloudy in that area. Now, there is another news from the, let's say, broader SAP Cloud Platform ecosystem. First that one with respect to the Cloud Application Programming Model. There is another blog by Mark Zaschke, 2 weeks ago, I think I brought up his blog on the getting started with the cloud application programming model with PostgreSQL. And this is now a follow-up blog post by Mike about running and deploying the cloud application programming model with PostgreSQL on SAP Cloud Platform Cloud Foundry. Of course, the Node.js flavor. And this is quite extensive blog post on how to get things going, especially with the proprietary and, from my point, not very well designed MTA stuff. So this multi-target application stuff that is not really well known all over the ecosystem. It's just an SAP thingy. So I also hope that this will at some point in time go away. But that's my opinion. The blog post itself is really, as you see here, and those who listen must believe it, or look at the blog post, really quite extensive on how to do things, how to set up all the configuration files, and so on and so forth. Again, yeah, great contribution by Mike, who is also one of the main contributors to this project on PostgreSQL support for the cloud application programming model. Then there was one news that came out this week that I put into the Kyma section because it could be put anywhere, but there was a news that might cause some confusion, and that was the announcement that Docker is deprecated by Kubernetes. Now you might ask yourself, what does this mean? I build my images with Docker. Can I no longer run them on Kubernetes? Do I have to switch there? And it's really important to read this blog post, or I also referenced a thread on Twitter that explains what was deprecated and what is not deprecated. So to make a long story short, if you build your containers with Docker on your desktop, those containers and images still work on Kubernetes. That's absolutely no problem up to now. The thing that changed was the container runtime interface, or the usage of the container runtime interface, because Docker is a container runtime within Kubernetes was kind of not perfectly fitting, because Docker kind of shielded the container runtime interface by some convenience layers, and Kubernetes had to bridge into that container runtime interface in order to make things running. And now they said, okay, we will no longer do that, and that's why they deprecated the stuff. So if you're working in that area, if you're interested in there, take a look at this blog. If you just want a quick overview, take a look at the Twitter thread that I referenced. Now to the point that I referenced before, or that I introduced before, there was one more news in the broader area of the SAP Cloud Platform with respect to an SDK, the SAP Cloud SDK, formerly known as the SAP S/4HANA Cloud SDK. As you might know, the Cloud SDK comes with a pre-built pipeline in order to build the projects. That was part of the Cloud SDK, and this is now deprecated as of version 45 that came out 16 days ago. And that's important because the content kind of migrates to the pipeline of Project Piper, which from my perspective makes sense, because the Project Piper is kind of the umbrella for all the CI/CD stuff that is going on in the SAP area, but you have to do a migration. So this is not really just an exchange of the pipeline. The general purpose pipeline is not exactly the same as the SAP Cloud SDK pipeline. So there is some work to do if you want to migrate. So that's it from the SAP side, from the pure SAP side of the house. Let's switch to Microsoft. This week, a new release of the durable functions came out with some really nice new features with respect to distributed tracing, with respect to new API to restart orchestrations, and some other features. However, read the release notes carefully, because as usual, some functionality is already there for C#, which is still the first-class citizen in the Azure function space, and some APIs will be supported in the near future with the SDKs for Node and Python. So once again, if you're not in the .NET Core area or C# area, you have some delay with respect to functionality that is contributed. Then there was another very interesting blog post with respect to durable functions in the area of durable functions using Python, because there is another project called Apache Airflow, and this at the first glance looks like covering the same stuff like durable functions do. And Apache Airflow seems to be, I'm not a Python guy, but it seems to be very well picked up by Python developers. And so this blog post gives you a little bit more insight on how durable functions work and how Apache Airflow work, and what are the differences and what are the different functionalities. Because as I said, on the first glance, they look quite similar, but on a second glance, they have really some differences in there that you should know about when you make the decision, do I go this way or that way? So very well, if you are in that area, it's a very well-written blog post and nice read if you're interested in that. Then we have another news from the serverless area with respect to Azure Logic Apps. I announced that stuff several weeks ago, that they are now capable of running anywhere. And now there was one blog post that came out that also highlighted another aspect of this new, let's say, runtime, or the redesigned runtime, that would be the correct term, with respect to connector extensibility. As you know, when you work with Logic Apps, the connectors are the thing in the Logic App space, because you can connect up a lot of things very easily. And this blog post describes about the extensibility to add built-in connectors into the new runtime, and also, and that's important, how to use that extensibility framework in order to make use of custom build in connectors. So that's kind of an overview on how the extensibility model of this redesigned runtime works. Yeah, that's already it from the Microsoft side of the house. So we're nearing the end of the year, and yeah, I think not too many news will be coming out in the next weeks in general. So let's switch to the universe in between SAP and Microsoft. There are two contributions by the SAP on Azure podcast or video podcast that I want to make you aware of. One was episode 18, and that was one about the cloud adoption framework. Now, this is not completely specific to SAP and Microsoft, but this is something, if you are working in the area, if you are dealing with introducing Azure at customer sites, this is something that you should take a look at, because this gives you a very, very structured and very, very lean approach on how to make this introduction a success. And if you have not yet heard about the Cloud Adoption Framework, then this short contribution by the SAP on Azure video podcast might give you a first impression on how things work. I'm quite sure that the focus is not perfect for application development, but you can use it. You have to know the Cloud Adoption Framework first came of migrating workloads like SAP on Azure workloads, but this also can perfectly used for introducing cloud for app development. So definitely worth watching. And then we had another one, episode 19 of the SAP on Azure video podcast, where Roman Broich, one of the cloud solution architects of Microsoft, presents some insights about data and Azure and SAP and how those things work together, how they correlate. And that's really the focus of the complete talk of Roman. So if you are in the area of kind of analytics, big data analytics, data-driven processes, BW, data warehousing, then this might be very interesting for you to see what's possible, how you can combine all the different offerings. Then I want to draw your attention to two more blog posts in the area of SAP and Microsoft. One thing is a blog post about Azure DevOps used for CI/CD for SAP UI5 projects. It's an overview blog post about what you can do with Azure DevOps and how the company of the author uses Azure DevOps in order to deploy, I think, a quite high amount of UI5 apps, or quite complex UI5 apps. I think it's written down here. Yeah, we have 5 huge UI5 application with an average of 30 and 50 views and 7 user guides. So they are fully automatically deployed using Azure DevOps. So if you are sticking around the area of CI/CD, definitely worth a look. Azure DevOps is always worth a look. Also, especially in combination perhaps with Project Piper. Then one further blog post, again, a blog post that I really like because it's dealing with a real life problem that you have, and it decently describes how to solve it, and that's about the application gateway web application firewall on Azure and the setup of this thing for internet-facing SAP Fiori apps. So really a scenario that will cross your path as soon as you want to expose Fiori apps to the public internet and want to make use of a web application firewall on Azure. Again, a really extensive blog with real life experience on how to do things, also describing the prerequisites with respect to the SAP system, and so on and so forth. So that's, again, a high quality contribution on real world problems. Then let's go to the educational area. This week there is one post by Microsoft on, let's say, a fast track series about some topics that fall into the area of SAP and Microsoft. It's, I think, especially for partners of SAP and Microsoft. Yes, it's for Microsoft partners, so not for customers. And it's about 3 topics. One is the Azure Monitor for SAP solution. One is Azure Active Directory. And another one is Power Platform in combination with SAP Cloud Platform. As far as I can see, all sessions are in German, and all sessions are held by very well-known contributors in that area. So if you have the time, they start on the 7th of December, and the for me interesting ones concerning Azure Active Directory is on 10th of December, and the last one by Martin Pangratz is on the 15th of December. So you find the links in the show notes in order to register there. Then I have one more generic announcement for education that's not directly targeting SAP and Microsoft, but I think it's worth to mention. It has an overlap with SAP TechEd, but well, I didn't find too many talks at SAP TechEd that I find interesting, so maybe this might fill some gaps in a very positive sense, and that's the Technology Day of InnoQ. If you do not know InnoQ, from my perspective, it's the kind of gold standard for architectural consulting, technical consulting in the cloud area, in the domain-driven design area. And there is really half a day starting at noon about different topics like responsive web apps, like microservices, and so on and so forth. And there is also a blue hour, kind of starting the evening part with completely different topics, like even cooking vegan. And there is a technology night, and this is something that I'm really looking forward to. For example, by one of the founders of InnoQ on how to build a consultancy people enjoy working for. So yeah, interesting talks if you have the time. I think it's not lost time that you will spend there. Okay. Anyway, as I said, next week is TechEd. I think that's well known by those who listen or watch this podcast. And then I have two more blogs finishing up with respect to developer productivity. One is by Abel1 about the optimum developer productivity with respect to using GitHub, using Visual Studio Code, and using Azure. So this is kind of an introduction, kind of a teaser for the upcoming GitHub Universe conference that is also taking place next week on how to combine those stuff and being really productive with it. And last but not least, I have referenced one short tweet which gives you some insight how to make work with Visual Studio Code even more productive by tuning and tweaking your Visual Studio Code workspace. Okay, yeah, that was it from the myNewsWrap for this week. I hope I had some stuff in for you that did not cross your path yet. Some news that you might find interesting. I will record and distribute the next session on next Friday, and as you can think of, it will be a special edition about SAP TechEd. At least I'm planning to do that. I hope there is enough news next week on that stuff. So, see you there. Have a nice Friday. Have a nice weekend. Till then, bye.